today we'll have a small I don't know, presentation then over the topic of passwordless. Yeah, my name is Siim Vene and let's get rolling. To give you a bit of a background as well, SMIT as an acronym, it is a IT and Development Center, basically a glorified IT department for the Ministry of Interior in Estonia. We have 400 employees and roughly 8,000 users. But well, more important than the numbers of users and employees is the number of different IT services, or they're not necessarily even IT services, but services for the ministry that we are helping them to provide. And well, that a lot of the complexity stems from there. I work there as a chief architect for infra and platform services, and identity access management is also part of my domain, if one can say that. So that's why I'm talking here today for you as well. What we have investigated and what are our conclusions or findings today. My background is also I have worked for finance sector, for telco sector, and currently I'm also helping to design public cloud strategy and implementation plan for the public sector. So I have a pretty diverse set of experience under my belt. And just to set this, let's say, scene or the level, when we are talking about passwordless, it's not just a technology. Passwordless is basically a process or a set of processes and technologies. And the aim is that we want to identify a user in a secure manner without requiring that said user to provide a password for authentication. So it means that we need to use other methods to confirm that said user's identity. And well, the goal is to be more secure and at the same time more convenient. And those are usually mutually exclusive topics, but you'll never know. Today we're talking about why we're talking about the passwordless at all, then what are the enablers of it, and how part there I'm going to cover the how we are going to implement it, or where we are at the moment in the Ministry of Interior or SMIT in particular. But yeah, some of the aspects of the why are pretty obvious, I would say. That the passwords as a technology, 50, 60 years old at least, when we are talking about electronic computers, going back to thousands of years already when we are talking about analog systems. Also why part is the complexity where we have ended up today when it comes to trying to identify who the user is behind the computer. And also drivers for the why are the recommendations and standards. When it comes to the password from the security perspective, then Verizon has done the interesting work for the pretty many years already. And this, I think, was their findings from last year. This year's annual data breach report will be released next month, so fresh findings are not out there, but significant amount of breaches are because of passwords. So think about it. This is not a new technology. We have put significant amount of engineering system design behind that, and still it's a major way for, let's say, hackers, if you want to call them that, to exploit our systems. And at the same time, this slide is even not meant to be readable, but it illustrates pretty well, at least for me, the user experience today that we have created for the users to create those secure passwords, the complexity of those passwords and the length of it, and the forced rotation period, and etc. Purely from the user perspective, I would say that it's one of the worst aspects of modern corporate environment. If you leave all the other aspects aside, then everything revolving around passwords, I say that it's a major headache. And even regardless that it's such a bad user experience, modern, let's say, hacking systems don't even bother to brute force the systems or the passwords. We are also taking into consideration the publicly available information about the users, and from that we can deduct well-established patterns of human behavior, for example. So that if someone knows about my age, my name, where I live, and etc., something that has nothing to do with my work and nothing to do with my password per se, they can deduct from there that SIEM is it's pretty probable that SIEM uses that sort of complexity of that sort of password when it comes to security. So it has been constant race between the good and bad guys for years, but it's gotten worse every year. Also, from the regulation perspective, well, nothing today says that you must do the passwordless or strong multi-factor authentication, but the regulations and directives are getting there. DORA is Digital Operational Resilience Act, and this tries to regulate more the financial sector. And NIS2, that is Network and Information Security Directive, this is more geared towards the public sector of European Union. Let's put it this way. And they are both, let's say, they do not enforce strong multi-factor, but they are strongly encouraging and emphasizing the need to start thinking or taking, let's say, advanced protection measures to ensure that the data that is processed and that integrity and the confidentiality of the data is ensured. Although NIS states that where appropriate, use multi-factor authentication. It doesn't state that you must use, but it tries to nudge the public sector at least towards thinking about the multi-factor authentication. On the other hand, United States has taken a lot more stringent approach to it. And as you can see, it's already almost 3 years old executive order. And the interesting part in that executive order was that within less than a year, the agencies shall adopt some sort of multi-factor authentication. So it was pretty strong signal for the United States government agencies to start implementing or thinking towards there. But also in SMIT, we are following quite closely what NIST, or National Institute of Standards and Technology, is doing. And they have been working towards multi-factor authentication for quite a while. And as you can see from year to year, this is from the 2017, they have started creating those guidelines that, and they started with, let's say, more protected data, that it should be, access to it should be protected with the multi-factor authentication. Then came the, let's say, the executive order that all the US government agencies are required to implement multi-factor authentication. And now, let's say, a bit more than a year ago, it is stated that it is required throughout the federal enterprise. So in Europe, we are approaching it a bit more softly, I would say, but at the United States, they are a lot more stringent in that perspective. Now, when it comes to, well, this is, let's say, the background of why part. Now, when it comes to what second factors as such are nothing new. And I'm pretty sure that most of you are using on daily basis something from those second factor. At least I use I use all 4 of them actually on daily basis. So the industry has moved towards securing that authentication for quite a while actually. And for, let's say, different use cases, be it a private or enterprise setting, they have been used for quite a while. And all of them have their own shortcomings, and some of them, especially email and SMS-based authentication, this is something that is considered already, well, not secure, I would say. But still, it's really widespread. So when we're talking about multi-factor authentication as such, I would say that it's pretty well established already. And a lot of companies, if not, then probably are thinking along these lines. But typical thing that I have encountered is that, but yeah, I have already some sort of multi-factor. And well, when we are talking about really typical corporate environment, then it's usually composed of some sort of Windows workstations or Windows laptops. And establishing a smart card login is, I would say, quite trivial, or not trivial, but it's a simple matter of implementing it. But smart card login only removes a certain aspect of a password, but it doesn't fix the underlying problems that are by design when it comes to the Windows domain authentication. And the main problem is that how the process actually works. So even if we have user here that authenticates herself with the PIN and the smart card, then on the background, well, there is, let's say, a ceremony of exchanging keys and tickets. And the service ticket and the key combination, that is, let's say, the end of the authentication ceremony. This is something that is actually used to authenticate that said user against the services that are, let's say, integrated with the Windows domain services. And a really typical, or let's say really well documented attack vector is to scrape that service ticket or the combination of that service ticket and the key from the memory, from the cache by the attacker, and authenticate by the user against different services. So even if we have, let's say, a strong multi-factor authentication for that user, we still are able to scrape the keys and yeah, well, we are at least having an impression that we are having a secure authentication. With the Windows 10, it went a bit better, and a bit better in a sense that that if you have Windows 10 and there are certain version of it, but let's say if you have Windows 10 or above, then if you haven't established credential guard, then please do it. It removes a lot of the vectors from that attack vector and puts all those, let's say, legacy implementation of user authentication puts into the separate secure enclave within the system, and it makes for the attacker a lot harder to scrape those keys and to establish a foothold in an enterprise setting. But still, even with that, let's say, credential card, you are still left that usually the smart card or the smart card is in the reader, and nothing stops from the attacker to get that PIN code with the key logging methods and just use the PIN code in the background with some scripts or some other processes without user even perhaps acknowledging that he or she is being authenticated on behalf of her without even having it present. So yeah, even if the multi-factor is there for, I don't know, a decade or even perhaps 2 decades already, it has still quite many issues that, and Microsoft has acknowledged it and is working towards it, but yeah, well, still, we have a lot of legacy systems laying around and there are no easy or quick fixes in that regard. Now, if you haven't been living under a rock, and well, I had at least a couple of years ago, but then you are probably aware of the FIDO2 alliance and the FIDO2, let's say, set of standards. And FIDO means fast identity online. Basically, it's an industry consortium, and we are talking here all the major players like, I don't know, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, Google. It's pretty well-established consortium of organizations, and what they are trying to do, they are trying to implement a new authentication standards or specifications that would allow and authenticate users with the public key cryptography instead of a password. So pretty noble, I would say, initiative. And when we're talking about the PKI or public key infrastructure or certificate-based authentication, it's also nothing new. So a typical workflow of, let's say, creating an account is, as you can see, it's basically sign a request, or when you are trying to sign up for a service, then instead of creating a username and password, you are creating, or you are already having a public and private key combination, and you are, let's say, authenticating as a user with the certificate-based flow. So nothing new there as well. It's just that implementing it traditionally was pretty hard technology-wise. And this is something that the FIDO2 with the standards across different platforms are trying to establish. And the authentication flow is pretty similar. That when I want to sign into the service, then basically I have to sign with my private key that sign-in requests. Nothing extraordinary there, right? From when we're talking from the corporate perspective, or let's say going a bit more into detail or technical wise, then obviously the certificate pair needs to be protected, and because, well, this is the most desirable set of bits and bytes that the attacker might want to get after, right? So, and this has, let's say, brought the Cambric explosion of different authenticators, be it the physical or app form factor, that are helping us to do exactly that, to just, let's say, create and hold that public and private key pairs. And the typical process would look like that. Yeah, we need some sort of authenticator. We want to either log into the computer, for example, or log into the some web application. Then we need to unlock that application with a PIN or with biometrics or something else. And then that basically that authenticator is a secure enclave that holds that public and private key pair, and it's unlocked to sign requests. And well, pretty much it, right? Well, and this is something where I also have encountered that, yeah, but PIN code. And what do you mean, Siim? You are started to talking about passwordless authentication, and all of the sudden now we're talking about the PIN. Well, PIN and password, they are inherently different things. That PIN is something that is just used to unlock the authenticator. It's not used, it is not something that is sent over the internet or over the web to some service. It is just, let's say, local. And also, let's say, an important thing to remember is that the authenticator is a secure enclave that sits outside of the computer. So it's a lot more difficult for the attacker to target that secure enclave compared to the system processes that live within the operating system. And also, PIN is, let's say, when it comes to multi-factor authentication, PIN is an interesting animal from that perspective that when you think of your typical experience with the passwords, then I'm guesstimating that the requirements are between 12 to 15 or 20 characters that are, let's say, special characters, big, small numbers, big, small letters, and etc. That is difficult to remember. When it comes to the PIN, we can be, since it's part of that multi-factor authentication process, we can have a lot less stringent requirements for it. For example, 6-digit PIN is considered even by the NIST strong enough already for the secure systems. 6 digits, a lot more easier to remember or memorize than 12 or 20 digits. Plus, actually, NIST suggests that that rotation of the secrets is something that should not be designed into the processes. So when it comes to the user acceptance, then 4 to 6 digit PIN that user don't need to rotate is a lot more digestible than that 20 digit complicated or complex password that needs to be rotated in, I don't know, half a year or weekly basis or whatever other processes security-wise are in place. So they are different from that perspective. Now, when it comes to practical matters, most of the organizations are implementing some sort of directory system when it comes to identity access management, and Microsoft Active Directory is probably most common in the industry. And Microsoft is offering through the hybrid deployment of that Active Directory the passwordless authentication. So if your organization today has Office 365, then probably you're covered already. So you don't need to do a lot to start implementing the passwordless authentication. It's actually that simple. And the Entra was previous. They changed the branding this year. Previously, it was Azure AD, but well, same thing more or less. But anyway, when you are in corporate environment and you have the hybrid deployment, or you have that Azure AD or Entra AD now, basically you have 4 options how to implement passwordless authentication in one way or another. And I don't know if it's the detriment or it's a plus, but it's a really high probability that when you are going to implement passwordless authentication, you are going to use a combination of either all of them or at least most of them. And I will come to that in a how section of that presentation, why I dare to claim that. But anyway, yeah, when I said that the modern, let's say, authentication is basically a certificate-based authentication, then regardless of what of those 4 methods you are using, largely the authentication process looks the same. That the user presents the authentication intent, and they are sent back, let's say, a nonce or package that they need to sign. And when they sign it, they send it back to Azure ID or the Entra ID, and they are received the authentication token in return. And this is something that they authenticate themselves against the different services. And here I have illustrated, one of them is device-based authentication, which means that here is implemented the fingerprint scanner of most of the laptops that are already present today in the marketplace. And the second is some sort of physical or virtual authenticator that more or less does the same thing, but by large, the process is the same. They do not differ a lot. And also Microsoft has put out this, let's say, matrix where they give suggestions that if you have different personas, then for those personas, depending if they are using, let's say, Windows device or something else, suggestion is that use that sort of technology for that authentication process. And on initial view, I looked at it and it was like, yeah, pretty much makes sense. Yeah, well, why not? But when I went to the details, then at least for Ministry of Interior and the SMIT, I draw up this conclusion that when we are talking about personas, then our engineers actually have 2, let's say, roles or 2 personas. So all the privileged activities are admin persona, and the same engineer has actually an information worker persona as well. Or we have actually separated those 2 functions, even if it's a 1 person. And for the privileged access management, this is something, and I will touch that briefly later on, but there we are using completely different approach when it comes to, let's say, securely accessing privileged part of our systems. And other than that, we treat ourselves as information workers, which means that it's a high probability that we end up with Windows Hello for Business and FIDO2 security key and probably authenticator as well as a backup. And on the mobile side, I will expand the CDA acronym, and probably authenticator app will be something as well, something as backup as well. And the frontline worker, this is something where I'm differentiating between an employee for the Ministry of Interior who has their personal workstation or laptop and a shared, let's say, workstations or laptops. And depending on the use case, the authenticating methods might differ. And I will touch that briefly in a couple of slides as well. And now it is down to the how part, or what we have done in Ministry of Interior or in SMIT in particular, and where we are today. The vision is actually quite simple. And this is something that it is a high probability that we finalize some sort of rollout this year. Initially, the intent was that when this presentation happens, then we have already, let's say, everything in production, and we can report raging success in securing the police work and ourselves. But well, life has made its own correctors. But anyway, the vision is that we will use the strong multi-factor authentication for all users in our domain, and the complex or complicated part is equally for both workstations and applications. So think of it. When you implement the passwordless authentication, then you should do it in a manner that you don't require some sort of hybrid setup between, depending where your users end up. And this is where it gets, let's say, murky or complex and complicated. So the first thing is that if you start implementing the passwordless authentication, map your main use cases first. And why I say map your use cases first, implementing it is really easy, but you need to know where you start or for what you start implementing it. And I will go over those use cases in detail, except for processes. I would say that the processes is something that engineers usually tend to overlook, but please think of that whole life cycle of that part of identity access process or life cycle. You need to think how the users get their multi-factor devices, how they enroll themselves, what happens if something gets lost or broken, how do you unenroll them, and etc. and etc. And I would strongly suggest these by design have already multiple methods available for the users, so that if something unwanted happens, such as broken YubiKey or something else, then they have immediately another and equally secure method to continue their daily work. I strongly suggest considering that. That's why I said that that it is highly probable that you will end up using multiple different methods how to securely authenticate your users. Now, access to the workstation part, I would say that it's easiest to implement. If you have today already, if you are using Office 365 products and you are using Active Directory as a user directory, or let's say a part of your identity access management process, then start utilizing strong second factor is literally a couple of toggle switches away. And this is no extra cost for you. So enabling it, I would say that if you are a decision maker in IT, then just start enabling it. It's literally that easy. The easiest part is with an asterisk, because life is never easy. You have probably non-Windows workstations in your environment. You need to think how to establish the caching of the credentials, or what happens when user goes in Ministry of Interior. You can't access anything from the laptop unless you are authenticated to the workstation and to the VPN. We don't have split VPN. So it means that when I go, I don't know, for example, to the conference, I can't access the online resources of the Entra ID before I have established some sort of network connectivity. But how can I log into the computer when I don't have cached credentials and I can't even set up the bloody network connectivity? So you need to think about a lot of different aspects, not just, let's implement multi-factor. Plus, to my knowledge today, for example, Mac OS devices do not support fully FIDO2 as an authentication method. So you need to think about some sort of certificate-based authentication there as well. But when you have Windows environment, Windows workstations, it's pretty well established. Microsoft has really good documentation how to do it. It's not difficult, I can assure you. So just go and do it, and your users will be happy. It's that FIDO2 or that certificate-based authentication. It's an interesting paradox that usually security and usability are opposing forces. But here, the experience of organizations who has established that the user's acceptance is surprisingly high, actually, which is, I would say, also boost to that project. And here in the presentation, I have spoken about YubiKeys more than once. Microsoft supports, and I checked it today. 40 different vendors. So it's not like YubiKey is de facto standard of implementing passwordless authentication. It's just that YubiKey is pretty well established market player. And well, if you can manage to use that, then all of the better. But something to keep in mind as well, and this is also from the experience of organizations who are in production more than a month, some already years. All of those physical authenticators, they have different form factors. And although it might be appealing to start looking into those key form factors first, then experience has shown that if your user has a personal laptop, then that nano form factors are a lot more preferable. They break less. They are, let's say, less obtrude. They are, let's say, the usability is better with those nano devices. This is something to keep in mind. And also, as I said earlier as well, we are considering also the Microsoft Hello for Business that utilizes already built-in fingerprinter scanners. But when you design some sort of universal system, then having, let's say, built it up with the physical authenticator, such as YubiKey, for example, it helps us to create this really standardized platform that is universal regardless of the laptop vendor, laptop vendors, laptop version, and etc. So you will have guaranteed complexity of utilizing the Hello for Business and be worrying about the compatibility of those devices. With the let's say authenticators, physical authenticators, you have a secure enclave that is standardized regardless if you are using this vendor or that vendor, like Lenovo laptop, Mac OS, or Apple laptop, and etc. So this is why we are strongly considering that physical authenticator part. Plus, it resides outside of the computer system. And if you have noticed, they have all the different sizes of, let's say, buttons on them. And you actually physically have to touch a button of a secure enclave that sits outside of that said computer system. So it's an added, let's say, factor of security. The access to the application part, this is the most ugly part, without any doubt. And this is something that the organizations usually struggle the most, because you have really wide variety of different applications, and probably they are from SSO, single sign-on compatible to OAuth compatible to nothing compatible. So you have probably a lot of different fat clients, web clients, and etc. So implementing some sort of 5.2 compatible authentication flow is difficult. This is something that even we are not kidding ourselves. And you probably at least you need to plan or by design or already consider that not possibility but probability. Where we have ended up is that in Ministry of Interior, single sign-on is forbidden by default. And because of those attack vectors that I mentioned earlier, when you get credentials, you need to obtain only those authentication tickets or hashes once, and then you can basically rampage across the systems wherever that user is permitted to access. So in our environment, single sign-on is prohibited. But what we have leveraged is the OAuth or OpenID providers. And this is something that we have internally already, let's say, developed. The integration between those providers and the Entra ID authentication flow. And what was the Keycloak? we don't use the Keycloak, but Keycloak is FIDO2 compatible, WebAuthn compatible, really well-established provider that the organizations can leverage to lessen the application authentication part. And I really strongly suggest you consider that. If you have that already, all the better for you. The privileged access part, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that we are moving away from the workstation at all. The privileged access management systems, they are already also quite well established in the market. I think the Linea, Privix, well, there are, let's say, the market is saturated. And if you're not using, I strongly recommend you considering that. It's just that consider then a privileged access management system that also supports WebAuthn or FIDO2. And this is where and the beauty of it is that when you authenticate the user to that privileged access management system, you can use the same YubiKey or separate YubiKey. Well, it boils down to your own risk appetite. But what it does is that it actually leverages also certificate-based authentication, and it authenticates on behalf of user to the backend systems or to the privileged systems, so that you do not need to do the authentication of the users to the end systems, but the privileged access management system does it on behalf of the users. So this is something that we are definitely going to leverage, and we have already different, MVPs or proof of concepts already that have verified that theory. So this is not this is not something I'm just speculating. This is actually doable. The air gap part, this is an ugly part. We have air gap systems. I can't tell what we are going to do there. I can tell that there are vendors that support air gap FIDO2 compatible authentication flows. They are not cheap. And air gap is not compatible with that hybrid deployment of Entra ID, at least to my knowledge today. So if you have air gap systems, then tough luck. You need to design something else for these systems, but you can't leverage that latest, greatest, and coolest stuff for the user authentication. Sad but true. Mobile access is also, it depends, is the correct answer as always. Since we are not leveraging bring your own device type of methods, all the mobile access to our backend systems or internal systems are over controlled, personalized mobile devices, then we are investigating, and probably we are ending up some sort of certificate-based authentication so that the user authenticates themselves with biometrics, PIN code, whatever, to the mobile device, and the mobile device has already a combination of user certificate and device certificate, and in combination of those two, and in the presence of, let's say, VPN tunnel, they can access, let's say, certain applications, so that the authentication flow is already built into the device, since we can control the device. But yeah, well, this can vary a lot. And the mobile access, by mobile access, I'm actually today all the Apple devices, not just mobile phones, but also laptops fall under that category as well. Since, as I said, although we do have centrally managed Apple laptops, then Apple today, at least to my knowledge, does not support FIDO2 authentication to the Mac OS, unfortunately. Then what I really suggest you to do is go to the Palantir blog, and they have Passwordless authentication series. It's a free article series, and basically it's a tutorial how to do passwordless authentication in large corporation or organization. and they have their lessons learned documented there as well. But the second post is basically a tutorial how to implement passwordless authentication. I really suggest you go there. It's, I think, 2 years old or 1.5 years old blog posts, but they cover everything. So kudos to Palantir that they brought it to the public domain. It makes the implementation of it a lot easier. And let's say final slide before I can rest. I can get perhaps some rest and answer the questions if you have. Then keep in mind that although we as, let's say, a system owners or architects or specialists who design different systems and hopefully for the betterment of humanity and to make it more secure for the end users and organizations. Well, at the end of the day, even if we design that really cool, really secure, strong multi-factor authentication, then the education of the users is still as relevant as with the passwords. So even if you have really strong security systems in place, then still you're as strong as your users' willingness to protect those authenticators and those PIN codes that unlock those authenticators to finish the authentication flow. Yeah, but with that, I really appreciate you listening in, and this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, then I understand that the room is open for discussion for some time before we depart.
Yes, so thank you, Tim, for your very interesting presentation. And I see we already got a couple of questions. So I will read the first one. So what if security key with PIN gets stolen?
Yeah, it is let's say, a good question. Thanks for that. In the case of security key getting lost or stolen, you still need to keep in mind that you need to have a PIN code engraved into it, and you need to have both machine certificate and that user certificate combination to authenticate the users. So when you are designing the system, then design it in so that that security key is already, for example, tied to that in particular laptop. So then we have a combination of a device, an authentication device, and the PIN code being stolen or lost at the same time. And then what is the probability that it goes unnoticed and you don't have, let's say, enough time to disable both the laptop and the user account or the key tied to that particular user account.
Thank you. About if Entralt is down or Estonia external internet link is down, when police is down?
Yeah. Well, it is one of the inherent risks for that design. Obviously, you can leverage it with Elon internet or some sort of satellite connection for the cloud, and those credentials will be cached in the systems as well. And also, let's not forget that you always have a fallback to the password authentication, so that if all else fails, then you can still go back to the unsecure aspects of authentication. It's just that, let's say, it is improbable. The risk is there, but it is improbable. So, and there are, let's say, methods how to mitigate that risk. So I don't see it as a showstopper of implementing it in the first place.
Okay, so no more questions so far, but we still have a few more minutes, so we invite you to use this chance and get your answers live. Okay, one more question. User leave laptop on table, key on USB, and I had shoulderage pin.
Yeah, if that shoulderage is probably some sort of autocorrect. Yeah, well, well, let's put it this way. Users are a lot less likely to write down the PIN code if it's easily memorable. Because what I've seen is that when you force users to have this complex and complicated password rotation scheme, then the probability of writing the passwords down somewhere goes exponentially higher. So shouldering is probably over the shoulder or shoulder surfing pin. So yeah, you can't exclude all the possible combinations of the attack vectors, obviously. But I would say that that today implementing it is an order of magnitude more user-friendly and secure than what we have today in place with the passwords.
Okay, a few more questions.
Now I can read the questions now as well.
Okay.
The first one is that, do I think the passwordless future, it will increase more interest from the intruders to access organizations with zero-day or other methods? And could social engineering extinct with passwordless future? I would say that social engineering will become more prevalent with those secure authentication methods, because if attackers don't have easy vectors to the systems, then they obviously go to the next weakest link that it has been historically the user. And I would say that the social engineering part, trying to get hold of that combination of devices and knowledge of, let's say, PIN, it will probably increase significantly. And those targeted attacks with the 0 days or other methods, those are on the rise anyway. So yeah, I would say that passwordless as a authentication method, it doesn't obviously protect against the 0-day vulnerabilities and exploiting them. And the second question is that what was your user acceptance feedback? Today, we haven't tested it on the end users yet when it comes to the user acceptance as such. What I've gathered with the research, and Palantir blog was actually one of the, let's say, user feedback descriptions was there as well. Users actually were pretty comfortable with it. The problematic part is, at least today, with using that Azure AD or Entra ID, is that the user enrollment can be a bit tricky, because let's say, to register a security key to the user account, that user account needs already to be protected with multi-factor authentication, which means that most of your users who are not, let's say, adept with mobile authenticators, then they will have definitely, let's say, harder experience of enrolling themselves. Obviously, if you have already established, for example, smart card authentication with the systems, then you can use that to cover the multi-factor authentication part already for the Entra ID. And that significantly eases, let's say, the user enrollment to those, let's say, strong multi-factor authentication methods. And the final question, I assume, or next question is that how do you control the users' use of password managers? Well, today we are actually providing users the centrally managed password manager. But well, when it comes to erasing the passwords at all, then I would say that password management systems in general, the marketplace for the password managers decreases significantly. So at some point, you don't even need to control the usage of password managers since users don't need that.
Okay, so thank you. Looks like we do not have any more questions. Thank you, Sim, once again for your presentation. Thank you to all our participants who joined us today, and we will hope to see you next time. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much for the questions. It was interesting, actually, since usually it's just one way of presenting things, but yeah, thanks for the questions. They are definitely something that are more universal than just this presentation here today.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and well, on my end, have a good day.
Yes, and if you would like to get to know us, usually we invite you to contact us. You can see our contact details in the chat section. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.